All right, you guys ready for this?
Let's do it, brother.
Let me turn the speed on
1.25 so we can hear Jordan Peterson talk about Marxism.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
That's what Adam is called upon by God to do in the story of Adam and Eve, to subdue the world, subdue everything in its proper place so that the whole structure operates in a harmonious manner. It's a much more expanded view of what constitutes mental health. Anyways, education should serve that, right? And so if you take the staff of Moses.
Yo, can you pause it real quick, Eddie?
That's
You bet.
What is with this corny jacket he's wearing?
Yeah, that ass. What is it?
Is that like a Catholic jacket?
Yeah, it
or
looks like
a
it.
saint?
I think it's like a bunch of saints on his jacket.
Bro, it's like somebody your 80-year-old Catholic or something your 80-year-old Catholic grandmother wears.
My lord. My lord. I'll be right back, guys. Keep going, please.
That's the same as the magic wand of Gandalf. That idea of a magic wand. It's the traditional ethos associated with transformation and sacrifice around which communities aggregate themselves. And a proper humanities and religious education inculcates that center structure so that knowledge can be organized around it. The last time we talked, I suggested to you that we see the world through a biblical lens. Literally see it. I mean, literally, it structures our perceptions. And I've investigated that far more deeply. And
He seems a bit too
seems to be the
amped.
case with a corpus of
Yeah, maybe this was when he was still on the pills.
Didn't he only eat meat for like a year or something?
Yeah, he was on carnivore. He was like turning red. He's like, I feel great. Yeah, that was after he quit. I think he was addicted to benzos, which had to be rough kicking that.
Yeah.
stories like the biblical library is that if you know the stories, it structures your psyche so that you have a place to put information. And so that enables you to understand the current world and everything that's happening, but to place everything in the right context. And so the transmission of an unbroken cultural edifice, story-based edifice, is the manner in which you solve the alignment problem.
He uses he could explain this much more simply, the argument he's trying to make, but he's in a way making an argument against postmodernism in the idea that there should be no meta-narratives. And he's saying we should have like a understanding of our history as like a narrative leading up to now. But he's saying that should be the Christian narrative. We should look at things through the lens of, the Bible and the resurrection of Christ and stuff. So, pretty stupid. I mean, just to take, like, because Marius said, there's a lot of wisdom in the Bible, but like these stories weren't even meant to be taken literally by the people who wrote them. In a lot of cases, they were meant to be, there's parables and stories, and there's usually a good lesson at the core. But I don't know if they really wanted people to believe that somebody survived in the belly of a whale for 40 days straight, and that, we need to understand that as a real part of our historical development.
I think it's interesting to me how many people go on and on and on about following the Bible and how, everyone should be this religion or that. Yet I've been studying this stuff a bit recently, and they seem to ignore all of the Bible's actual teachings, right?
Isn't it that one line about the camel and passing through the eye of a needle? Like it's
it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's he wasn't saying that like, oh, just because like God hates rich people. No, saying it because of the life of a rich man and how he has to achieve that wealth, right? I mean, the entire philosophy of Jesus Christ and the Gospels is giving, right? It's a life of service and community and duty. And Marius is correct here. Like, Jesus would absolutely be called a communist by present right-wingers because he was. I mean, very, very simply.
And I think I saw Eddie mention this, but isn't that why they funded Protestantism in South America? Because Catholicism naturally led to, more socialistic ethos and ideas.
They did a big campaign against liberation theology.
Mm.
I don't know if it specifically involved funding Protestantism, probably because they were counterfunding against the popular liberation theologist priests with their own priests, which Protestantism is, as you said, a religion that parallels capitalism. Even the emergence of Protestantism in history as a, theology was right when capitalism was overthrowing feudalism and the actual political power of the Catholic Church. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if they indirectly that they pushed Protestantism while they were murdering all the liberation theologist priests and trying to stamp out left-wing Catholicism.
Not surprising. I want to answer a quick question from the chat. We don't even need to pull it up. Someone said that Jesus wasn't a communist because he condoned slavery. Really has nothing to do with communism. Those are the economic structures prevailing at the time. For instance, Mao Zedong, one of the most famous communists of all time, wanted to make George Washington from the 1776 revolution a posthumous honorary member of the Communist Party of China. So communism isn't about morally condemning things like that and just saying they're bad, right? It's about real world action and real world progress, right? And understanding the connection between what is and what becomes. Anyway, you can keep it going. Sorry, I don't mean to ramble.
Unite your society, integrate your psyche, pursue what's meaningful, and protect yourself from chaos and anxiety. So, and a solid education has been the traditional way of ensuring that occurs. And so, well, that's what we hope to offer with Peterson Academy. That's the focus of the books as well.
Whoa!
Let's not invest in education. Let's not get more teachers. Let's not get money out of like the textbook industry and corporations out of education. Everybody just join Peterson Academy.
Peterson Academy?
It's like they talk about structured education and they push creationism in the textbooks.
He just like went full full grifter. He like hit the whole grifter checkbox. All right, time for my red pill alpha male pyramid scheme courses.
Fuck.
Oh man.
Elucidate that. And so, can the universities do that? I don't think so.
I don't know if they have that philosophy. The philosophy and the way you're laying it out resonates with me. I think it's accurate. I think it when I'm in harmony in my life, that it all seems to make sense. It all works together.
Mhm.
What you're saying, it just rings true. I don't know if they're so infected with this ideology that
they've
flies
rejected
in the
it.
face.
They rejected it wholeheartedly. There's no uniting meta narrative. If you had to define postmodernism in one phrase, that would be it. And so what have they done? Here's the association with Marxism. Okay, so the Marxist.
Here we go.
And the problem is like they're not necessarily wrong about the fact that the academy system can't necessarily teach you the right stuff, but it's like that's why it's so effective what they're doing. They're drawing on real rational kernels that exist, you know.
Right, and then
Exactly.
giving you an answer that makes them money. How is the answer always, well, if you buy my new book?
I got a new course, yeah.
You know, like, $3,000 to Peterson Academy.
And I mean, speaking of drawing on rational kernels, we'll get into this more in a sec, but when I watched this video, at this point here, the 3-minute point, I already knew what he was about to say. When he said postmodernism and Marxism, he was going to draw on the French theorists, the Frankfurt School people, the people who have been exposed as essentially CIA assets and plants who distorted Marxism and try to turn it into radical liberalism and postmodernism. So he makes the connection here in order to strawman Marxism and then knock that strawman down, which is all that he ever does, which is why it was so unfortunate that the only big Marxist he's debated is Slavoj Žižek, because he's one of the people who does that shit.
Right.
Just have a counter narrative. It's the narrative of power. And it is a very powerful counter narrative because if you don't put the proper uniting principle.
Okay, stop already.
Power emerges.
Stop already. No, Marxism is not about the narrative of power. That sounds like the postmodernists. So it sounds like Foucault, right? Internal power dynamics between individuals. The problem with Foucault is that he begins in the middle, right? Fully formed individuals having relationships. He doesn't understand how we get there, right? And really, it's very anarchisty and fascisty, but that's a whole nother bag of bananas. Go ahead, Eddie. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Immediately, because people play power games, and
Right.
you can attain a certain degree of success and a fair amount of domination by playing a power game. And so Marx observed that one of the cardinal power games is economic, and it is probably the cardinal power game, right? There's economic disparity. Those at the top do take advantage of their position at the top to stabilize their position. Like in a functional society, productive people are at the top, but even among those at the top, they're still power-seeking crooks.
Stop.
So, now, Marx, of course,
No, this is not what Marx observes. Marx observes that there is a fundamental contradiction within how society is reproduced that had to develop, right? Out of the old, we get the new. That it's an ongoing process. It's not about fully formed people being mean when they're rich and powerful. No, it is not.
Absolutely. And I mean, he's talking about power and oppression, which is one thing. I mean, it's something that Marx looks at, but exploitation, which is what the ruling class does to the laboring class, is different. It's material, it's objective. It is how they control the surplus of society. Society produces what it needs in order to reproduce itself, and then there's a surplus which is controlled by the ruling class, and that's how they accumulate, is through that exploitation. And this is what Marx looks at. He doesn't say there are bad people who are in power because they're bad people. It's not a moralistic thing. That's something that he's reading into it, or not even reading into it. I'm sure he's never read Marx.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they try to say it's incidental, but if you took the richest billionaire, or any billionaire for that matter, and just changed his mind and had him become the nicest person in the world, he just wouldn't be a billionaire anymore. Someone would replace him. Someone would, he would be outcompeted.
Look, capitalism is one thing. The MCM circuit, the development of the MCM circuit, the realization of real concrete value. All of the book Capital is explaining how this comes about and how it functions. And through that, he elaborates his entire worldview, which has nothing to do with anything Peterson's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
of course, would say that, well, everyone who's economically successful is a power-seeking crook. And, that's a great thing to believe if you're a resentful Satanist like Marx.
Well,
And
it's
so,
how the
No. Again, no. It's not a moral judgment. I just explained it to you. They objectively control the surplus, and I know capitalists who are nice. I know bankers who are nice. It's easy to be nice when you have all this wealth and money, and you live in luxury, and you don't have all the financial stresses that the proletariat has on them. Makes it real easy to be a nice person, a nice guy. That's why Joe Rogan gets along with Peter Thiel and Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and all these oligarchs. But it doesn't change the fact that they have their own interests, which are directly contradictory with the interests of the proletariat. I mean, even mathematically contradictory. The less they pay their workers, the more profits that they make, the more money that Wall Street makes. And now, because of the stock market, you don't even know your boss. It's like a nameless, faceless corporation that doesn't give a shit about human life and is going to suck as much out of you as they can, or lobby the U.S. military to commit horrific mass murderous invasions in order to expand their profits, essentially control more markets and resources. So they can be as nice, or you could think whatever you want about the morals of the capitalist class. It doesn't change the fact that their interests are directly contradictory to those of the vast majority of society, and that they're running our country into the ground.
And this is what I cannot stand. What was I saying earlier? Like, why is he acting like he knows? The first thing about this, he's like going on and on about Marxism when it's so painfully obvious he has no idea.
He was on drugs.
Well, it could be
He was
drugs.
literally, he
Could be-
was on benzos. I'm sure like part of that is to give himself false confidence, to mask the fact that he knows deep down he's a fraud.
I would not be surprised, brother. I would not. Look, Marx spends an entire section in Capital explaining how the capital accumulation process is not theft. It's not gambling or a night in Vegas. Everything happens according to the rights within society. Like a capitalist accumulates through ownership, and that's no one's stealing anything, right? I don't get where this comes. Like he just makes shit up. Like Marx thought capitalists were all crooks. No, he goes out of his way to explain that is not the case.
Losers look at the world.
Well, that's for sure. But there is some just
That's how losers look at the world. That's how people who didn't get a development deal from Disney when they were in their 20s look at the world. Yeah, sorry, Joe. Not all of us had our fucking career sponsored by Walt Disney.
Right?
He's so out of touch. I used to like the Joe Rogan Experience, but it's actually pretty sad to see what Joe has become.
How the mighty have
Because-
fallen.
among the successful, there are
Yes.
right. Okay.
And a large percentage, because that's the culture in which they're existing.
Yeah, well, a dangerous percentage.
Yes.
And a critique of power is always a valid critique. Okay, so what the postmodernists do,
Yeah, they are almost all sociopaths, though. Like American Psycho is such a recognizable movie for a reason, because there are those American Psychos.
Because it's self-selecting for the people who can just turn off that part of their brain and just ruthlessly just take advantage of everyone.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
did when Marxism became ethically unacceptable, and that happened in the 1970s, is they metastasized it. They said, okay, we've got a victimizer.
Also not true. China. Counter argument, the 1.4 billion Marxists on the most powerful, soon to be most powerful country on earth.
Narrative that's played out in the economic sphere, and that's basically Marxism. We'll just multiply that until the same interpretive framework can be applied to all possible group distinctions. That's basically intersectionality. So sex is
No.
versus oppressed narrative.
No.
He's doing the Frankfurt School thing. I told you.
Like, what is he? No. Jesus Christ. We just multiply Marx's critique of power to apply to different things. No. Where do they get this idea from? It comes from fucking nowhere.
It comes
nowhere
from Derrida and Foucault and these weird people who called themselves Marxists. That's why it was such a powerful strategy. I'm always talking about this dialectic. You have the fake leftists who champion these people and say that they're Marxists, and then you have the right wingers who say, yes, that is Marxism. That's why you as proletarians should hate Marxism. No, it's radical liberalism. It's fucking CIA distorted nonsense. It's let's remove class from Marxism and apply it to gender and sexuality and all these different things related to identity politics. It's like, no, the second you said we're going to take the class away, it's no longer Marxism.
Yeah, it's a bunch of perhaps well-meaning, university students who read all this philosophy and then come to the conclusion that like the state is inherently authoritarian, inherently like oppressive, and it's the exact opposite of the conclusion you want to draw, and it just benefits the ruling class.
It's metaphysics. It's separating all of these things as if they're different. But look, the struggle against racism in the US is a particular historically determined form of the class struggle, right? It is a form working class people must of struggle that working class people must use against the ruling class, right? People aren't, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, okay, scratch that. I don't share anything in common with Jeff Bezos because my skin color is the same as his, right? I don't. Sorry. My black coworkers don't share anything in common with Barack Obama because of their skin color, right? He is their class enemy. They have a struggle because they're working class, and it is a particular form of the black working class, right? Yeah, sorry. I'll try to stop that.
We're trying to break Noah of the habit of saying right after every sentence. So I've been counting. He's at 17 rights. Anyone was wondering. Or playing a drinking game at home. Well, if you are, you're now dead.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, I didn't mean to derail you.
It's fun. It bothers me that like they think intersectionality is somehow compatible at all with Marxism. If you know the first thing about the dialectic of universal in particular, you know that particular forms of universals are proof of the universal. Like it's always both. It's never one or the other.
Gender is an oppressed versus oppressor narrative. Ethnicity, race, ability, attractiveness, height. Any qualitative distinction is now recast as a battle between oppressor and oppressed. It's
the communists were against ability. That's why the Soviets kicked our asses in Olympic wrestling to this day, because they still have the Soviet system in place in Russia. But for the last 70, 80 plus years, that's why Cuba has all these gold medalists, even though they're a blockaded little island.
Look, you know why Marxism focuses on class and not ability and height and all of these nonsensical postmodern whines? It's because class is a symptom of a deeper contradiction within society, right? It's a reflection of the very way we go about being human, having some kind of contradiction within it, right? There is a contradiction in how our society reproduces itself. And it comes out as a reflection between people, right? MCM, remember what I said earlier? Money, commodities, then more money. That is what our entire society is built around right now. In order to do that, that splits us into classes, right? And there's leftovers of the old, and we were talking about reactionary classes, etc. earlier. But that is why we focus on class. It has nothing to do with power other than the proletariat, in order to continue the progress of society, needing to take political power.
It's an unbelievably brutal story. It's basically equivalent to the claim that the spirit of power is the ruler of the cosmos.
How can they do all this and ignore the possibility of an oppressor, like a male, adopting the identity of the oppressed, of a female, and entering into female spaces?
You can see how
Joe takes everything back to trans people in sports. That's like his whole podcast now. It's like, we get it, dude. Nobody really disagrees with you about this in the country.
You can see that it can't be dealt with because
wild, right?
Well,
that is wild.
Look, one of the things you see that's very characteristic of the utopian left is the absolute insistence.
The utopian left. You know, Marx and Engels should have wrote an entire book about how they're against utopianism and how there can be no utopian society and a new society has to be built from what's already been produced by the old. They should call it Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, and Jordan Peterson should sit down and read it.
Nah, they would have agreed with the Franklin School.
Is a victim. It's like, okay, we'll give the devil his due. Some oppressed people are victims, but some people who claim to be oppressed aren't victims. They're the worst kind of monsters that the most deranged imagination could barely conceptualize. Utopian, naive, radical progressives refuse their imagination for evil, and that delivers them into the hands of the absolute bloody psychopaths. Right? And they just don't see it. It's like, oh, those trans people, they're just striving to be free. It's like, you wait until you have one of them in your house, buddy, and you're going to find out.
This guy's fucking manic.
You just wait until you wake up next to a trans person and you thought you slept with a beautiful woman and you look to your right and you see a bearded man next to you. This is the future the Marxists want for us all. Oh my goodness.
So how do they protect themselves? They just deny the existence of malevolence or attribute it to socioeconomic inequality.
Right.
All criminals are victims. It's like, no, first of all, lots of people who are victims aren't criminals.
Not the same argument. He just inverted the argument to instantly straw man it. Someone who says all criminals are victims in a way. No, not all victims are criminals. What? That's a complete. What does that have to do with anything?
In fact, poverty does not cause criminality. That's a lie. And it's a very damaging lie to the poor. Because if poverty was equivalent to criminality, the logical thing to do is just to lock up all the poor.
No, dumbass. The logical thing to do is to lift them out of poverty. You idiot. And I mean, Marx, in his critiques of the lumpen proletariat, this class that capitalism creates, he calls them social scum. He sees them as people who rob and exploit the actual proletariat, the people who, you know, wake up and work in draining, exploitative, productive jobs all day. So he condemns the lumpen proletariat, but also to say that that class is not created by poverty and capitalism reducing everyone's material conditions. Of course it is. You think people rob liquor stores for fun? I know that you and Joe Rogan have been rich for a really long time, so you're almost unbelievably out of touch. But people rob stores and commit crimes usually because they don't have any fucking money.
Because there's no other option usually.
Right.
And look, like, don't get me wrong. Engels was even like more horrible. He called them the lowest of all social scum. And he was congratulating the Paris communists for shooting them on sight, for hanging signs that said that thieves will be shot, right? But just like talking about whether or not someone who's a criminal is a victim of something ultimately doesn't matter. If you want to solve the problem of crime, you need to remove the conditions that creates it, which is poverty. Like, you can't get around that. It just is, right? Therefore, we need some form of society that doesn't create a relative impoverishment between people in different classes, right? As the bourgeoisie gets richer and richer and richer, it becomes harder to maintain the other end because they're literally getting their money from parasitism now, right? It's not even like the old productive bourgeoisie. It's literally taking money out of the economy, taking value out of the money in our bank accounts while it's just sitting in the bank doing nothing. It is getting worth less and less and less as they compound their interest rates for speculation and more debt, right? So they borrow money in order to start some enterprise or invest in real estate, which is collateral to borrow more to do it again and again and again and again and again, right? And when they do this, the bottom eventually falls out and we have a crash. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, the form of society we have right now creates poverty. Worse, it is creating reproletarianization. The middle class is gone, which is why we see the spikes in crime, right? Why we see the spikes in suicides and depression and anxiety. It's not just, big pharma wanting to get us addicted to drugs. That's there too. It's because there is no longer a future for working American people. And it's people like Peterson who pretend that arguing endlessly over whether we call criminals victims or not does something that are the problem.
All right, just a little bit more here.
Let me, sorry, I need to rant for one more fucking second because this bothers me.
Okay.
It's everything with these people. It's everything. They don't actually think about solving the problem because for them, the conditions as they are now is static. It's stuck in time. It will always be this way. It just, that's the way their logic goes. But it's like, and I say this metaphor all the time, or analogy all the time, rather. It's like taking an ibuprofen for a headache that you got because you have a brain tumor, right? One, that ibuprofen ain't going to cut it. Two, even if it did, you still have a brain tumor. You're going to continue getting headaches. They're going to continue getting worse. And eventually you're going to die if all you do is take ibuprofen.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of moralizing about the headache, try to figure out what's causing it.
Which
Fucking A.
that's actually that's the way the whole healthcare system operates.
Yep.
hmm
It's a reflection.
Right.
Right. Well,
Right.
there are many pathways from poverty forward, and one of them is criminality. But you can say the same thing about wealth. So the idea, and that's basically a Marxist theory of causality, it's like, well, those people's oppression is what's causing their lack of law-abiding what conduct. It's like, no, wrong, seriously wrong, and dangerously wrong, and ridiculously naive. That's not how the world works at all.
Right. You're
Not how the world works at all. The people like me are supposed to have the money. What do you
I
think?
mean,
You think we should lift people out of poverty?
He doesn't
Wrong.
think the
No.
world
My
works
money.
if you eliminate people's poverty, they commit fewer crimes. What does he mean?
in a way, what he's trying to say is a very subjectivist view that we all have free will and we're just making rational choices all day, every day. But when he does that, he forgets that every choice everyone makes is within a context,
hmm
right? And your actual concrete, realistic avenue of options is always limited. People who get the big breaks that Rogan and Peterson both got don't find themselves in a position where they're contemplating whether or not to rob someone. They just don't.
hmm
So to act like it's just always a choice on its own is wrong. And it's just as wrong as like saying, oh, it's just poverty that does this, right? It's everything put together. It's also culture influencing the way we think. It's everything.
Yeah, I mean, who wants to commit a petty crime that can land them in jail for decades if they just don't have to? You know,
Precisely. And I'm pretty intimately familiar with how this works.
Mm.
I was a criminal back in the day. Like I was a really big scumbag. I'm 18 years clean. Like, and I'm very proud of the man that I've sort of built myself into. But I was in that position, right? Where I was contemplating and then carrying out crimes, right? And every single time, yes, it was my choice. I could have chose not to, but my limited avenue of options at the time had it so it was the only reasonable choice for me. And
Right,
yes,
I was in a
BLX, I was locked up for a while.
I was in a similar spot before I stole Noah's cat. The Patreon funds were down. There was nowhere else to go, and Noah bought this super expensive cat. After this was in his dark days. He robbed the Patreon actually,
Yep,
and used it
yep.
to buy this cat. So I realized I had to steal it back.
Well,
I
I had
agree
to look, Eddie. I had to. It was a rare French Arabian black and white cat. They stopped making those in the 70s.
I agree with everything that you said about Rogan too, except he probably is tempted to steal jokes from comedians who are actually good because he can't write any himself. Just kidding, Joe. I'm just roasting you. I'm gonna actually see Joe, or I'm gonna go to the comedy mothership for a friend's bachelor party soon. Don't tell my friend who's getting married; it's a secret.
Pretty cool.
I'm glad I just announced it publicly, but that's probably all we have to cover with that video. It's that was the meat of the stupidity. They just ramble after that. But.
The subjectivist critique of postmodernism that Peterson's trying to do is weak. Right? It's really, really, really weak because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like what he's saying does not matter at all. The materialist critique of postmodernism is very strong. It's guess what? Objective truth exists, right? It's the same sort of critique that Engels made, expanding on Hegel's critique of Kant and his thing in itself, the unknowable thing, right? So Kant was saying that this screen you're looking at right now, right? You're not actually experiencing that screen for what it is, but instead your perception of it. There is always a barrier. And postmodernism runs with this. They say instead of objective truth, there are instead competing narratives we tell each other. Right. And they develop, and there's the Foucault power relation to see who dominates, blah, blah, blah. But what Engels says is, look, when we prove our theoretical knowledge. Yep,
That's good.
When we prove our theoretical knowledge in practice, we are proving objective truth, right? So he gives the example of the madder root, and they used to make a red dye out of a tuber called the madder, right? But after they learn its chemical composition, chemistry, chemical science, right? They are able to more cheaply produce the same exact color with coal tar. They therefore took the, Kantian thing in itself and made it a thing for us, right? Our practical application of theoretical knowledge is proof of concrete objective truth. If it weren't for objective truth existing, my mom would have died decades ago. She would never have gotten a heart transplant, right? So Doug has a good one here. What a matter, Noah.
Mhm.
Sorry, I have a weakness for dad jokes.